Hello, my name is Sharonda White, and I'm founder and CEO of both Cause EDU and the Cause EDU Academy. That's two platforms with one goal: to help you attend the best college for you at the best price for you. Now, today I'm talking specifically to high school seniors, their parents, guardians, and anyone else who's helping them through the college admissions process, which, as of the month of March, has gotten a little bit more complicated, but I'm here to talk you through it. Now, first things first, the coronavirus pandemic has impacted colleges, universities, and high schools nationwide in a number of ways. But from an admissions perspective, it really means that schools are going to be a little bit slower to respond as they're transitioning to online learning, as they're transitioning to an online or work from home model, which many of the schools were not doing before. They're going to be slower to respond, but that does not mean that they're not going to respond. That does not mean that it's time to panic. Trust the process. There are millions of students from around the world who are going through the exact same thing, who are sending emails or maybe making phone calls and not hearing from schools right away. And some are panicking, but just know that they're going to get to you and everything is going to work out in the end. They understand, and they're just asking for you to be patient as they're transitioning to online. So with that out of the way, we're going to talk about money. Now, there are several things that you need to do now that the coronavirus pandemic has impacted the college admissions process. First and foremost, if you have not yet made a deposit or made a commitment to a particular school, if you need more time, then the first thing that you should do is ask for an extension in making a decision and paying your deposit. Now, on our website, causeeduacademy.com, we have listed the schools that we know of that have already granted automatic extensions to students who have not yet made a decision. In most cases, it's a 1-month extension, but for schools that have not automatically granted that, you are still able to call and ask them for an extension in making a decision and in paying your deposit. And my advice is, if anyone is unsure about how the coronavirus pandemic has impacted their income, how it's impacted how much money you have to pay for school, how it's impacted maybe which school you decide to go to, then definitely ask for that extension as soon as possible. And what you would do is you can email the school or you can call the school to submit your request. And if you call the school, they will more than likely ask you to submit your request in writing by email as well. So that's the first thing. The second thing is look at your budget. Now, for many of you, as a parent, as a family member, you might be impacted by the pandemic in terms of maybe job loss, hours being cut, maybe going from working overtime to no longer working overtime, whatever the case may be. If your income is impacted in any way, then what you need to do is, number one, ask the school how that might impact the financial aid that they're offering, because in some cases you can ask for a reconsideration of your financial aid. And number two, look at whether or not the school that you're planning to attend is still feasible, because it might not be, and you might need to make some very hard decisions sooner rather than later. And so definitely look at your budget, look at your income, and decide whether or not the school that you chose is still feasible. The third, as I mentioned before, of course, considering asking for additional aid. But the third, check your school's financial health. Now, the reality is that this pandemic is impacting schools negatively financially. It's impacting schools in terms of their endowments, which are based on the school's investments. And so if investments are dropping and the endowment is dropping, that impacts the school's financial health. Also, as schools are having to give back students a portion of their housing, a portion of other fees that they've paid for this semester, that's going to negatively impact a lot of schools. And for schools that were already struggling financially, they could end up closing. And so what you really need to do is check to see what the health of your school is in terms of the financial health and whether or not it's a good idea to still attend that school. So the best way to do that is really to look at the accrediting body. So for instance, if you're in the southern part of the country, then it's more than likely SACS, the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools. There are other, of course, accrediting bodies, but check the school to see whether or not your school is under any sort of probation, and if it's academic or if it's financial. If it is financial, then absolutely reconsider and look at going to a different school, because what you don't want is to commit to a school to start and then they lose their accreditation or they have some sort of financial issue that causes them to close. You don't want that to happen. So make that decision now. The next thing is checking your budget again. So with this past semester, with students having to go home unexpectedly, having to pay for last minute flights that were pretty expensive, having to pay for storage for extra months, having to pay for moving costs unexpectedly. The question is whether or not, if your child was in school right now, if they would have been able to make it through, if you would have been able to pay for these expenses. Most families, when they're budgeting for college, do not consider emergencies or the way they impact their budget. So definitely look at your budget. And if you have a budget for school that does not include emergency expenses, then definitely include some sort of amount for emergencies. The next thing, and this really applies to how you're paying for school. Look at the investments that you have. I know a lot of times parents move, or you should at least move your money from wherever it is to a safer investment vehicle as you're getting closer to withdrawing the funds. A lot of times parents wait until the last minute, and hopefully that is not the case for you. But if it is, and if your investments have been negatively impacted by the economy right now, then you might need to consider whether or not you need to pull the funds still, or if you should pull them from somewhere else. The second thing is to really look at or reconsider whether or not you plan to borrow from retirement. Now, my personal belief is that you should never, when it comes to paying for college, you should never borrow from retirement, because you can't borrow for retirement. But for those of you who are choosing to do that anyway, definitely look at your retirement accounts and see where the funds are now, if they've been negatively impacted by the economy and the current economic landscape. And if so, is this really a good time to withdraw the funds that you initially planned to? The next thing, federal loans. Here's what I will say about student loans. You should borrow first, if you have to, from federal loans. I personally am against borrowing private loans or borrowing anywhere else, because the reality is federal loans are already a lot. And once you graduate from college, the amount that you owe on federal loans is more than you'd want to owe. And I just don't think it's a good idea to borrow more than that. But what I want you to consider is the fact that with the current economic landscape, the federal government is waiving student loan interest for federal loans only, and they are waiving student loan payments for federal loans only. So if you're looking at private loans, if you're looking at other ways of borrowing money that are not considered federal, you really should consider, if another emergency happens, if there's another pandemic, if there's some sort of global economic crisis, what are the chances of you being able to have your student loan interest waived or your student loan payments just automatically deferred? Because the reality is federal loans are going to be safer than other ways of borrowing for school. So that is it for now. These are just some of the tips that we have. For more information, please visit our website at www.causeduacademy.com.